Okay, kids, your final chapter, chapter 28 of Dead End in Norvelt. By the time I woke, Dad had already used a tractor to drag the deer into the garage. He'd been a hunter all of his life, and he knew what to do. Ugh. He spent the morning cutting it up, separating the good from the bad, and packaging the meat. I didn't want to watch, so I stayed grounded in my room. Slumped was more like it. I was so bored, I wished the telephone would ring with Miss Volker calling to tell me Mr. Spiz had dropped over dead and I had to come down and write one last obituary. But that wasn't likely to happen. Still, that didn't mean I had to stop writing obituaries. I figured I could write one about the deer. I tried to get myself worked up like Miss Volker. I swung my arms around and did some deep knee bends. But I didn't have her scratchy old voice and her bottomless well full of words. I just took out a sheet of paper and began to write something that seemed honest. The deer, whose name was The Deer, was born about a year or so ago and grew up freely in the woods. He spent his days smelling and hearing and eating and feeling the warm hand of the sun on his back and doing all the things that deer have been doing for thousands of years until one day he was standing still and listening to a shoe snap a twig, followed by the sound of a Japanese rifle, and felt the bullet strike his neck. He ran, but there was no place to hide because his life ran out of him faster than he could run for cover. We thank him for providing food, and even though his death gives us life, it is hard to thank even an animal enough for that. It was a sad personal history, and like Miss Volker taught me, I tried to think of a famous story in history to liken it to. But all I could think about was Bambi. And that was not real history. That was just a cartoon story that people cried about, but it didn't stop them from hunting deer. If I was going to take this to Mr. Green and ask him to print it, I'd have to come up with some good history to go along with it. I was sorting through my books to find something just right when Dad came into my room. "Hey, I have a little souvenir for you," he said casually, and in one motion, he reached into his pocket and tossed me something. I caught it with one hand, and when I opened my hand, I saw the bullet and felt the weight of it. "It was still in the neck," he said. "Thanks," I replied, and smiled only because I knew he'd want me to smile. "I know you didn't load that Japanese rifle," he said, "but you did pull the trigger. Promise me you'll never do something that stupid again." "History won't repeat itself," I said. "Promise." He turned and walked out of the room to prepare for his trip. I stood up and closed my door and sat on the edge of the bed, feeling very different from myself. Maybe I felt like a city before it was invaded, or a ship before it sank, or happiness before it turned into sadness. I couldn't say exactly, but something was about to change in me. That change came 2 days later, when the phone rang. I whipped open my door and ran to the kitchen and snatched the receiver and pressed it against my ear. "Gantos, boy!" Spiz hollered into the phone. "How's Miss Volker?" I asked breathlessly. "Don't talk. Just listen," he instructed. "Go to her house and down into the basement. She's tied up down there." "Why don't you go to her yourself?" I asked, confused. "You're the one in her house." "I'm not," he said. "I have vanished." "That's impossible," he said. "A grown man can't vanish on a tricycle." And then the phone went dead. A feeling of horror came over me, and a moment later, I was out the door and running full speed down the hill to Miss Volker's house. I yanked open her back door and dashed to the basement door and pulled it open. "Miss Volker!" I hollered as I hammered my way down the steps. "Take your time," she advised. "If you fall and kill yourself, I might starve to death, all tied up like this." When I reached the last step, I looked at her. She was sitting in a kitchen chair with her arms loosely folded back behind her. On the floor around her were open heart-shaped boxes of chocolates. A few bold mice were nibbling on them. "This is how he tortured me," she said. "He knows I don't like rodents." I kicked at the boxes, which scattered the mice. "I'll wring his neck," I said, stepping behind the chair to untie her. "Ah, don't hurt old Spiz," she said warmly. "Over the last few days, I really had a pretty good time with him." "That's hard to believe," I replied, "but maybe he hadn't been so bad." Her hands were gently tied up in a floppy bow with a red ribbon from the chocolate boxes. Yes, she continued, old Spiz was very cooperative with me, and it didn't take too much work to get him to confess that he did all the poisoning. He killed them? I shouted. Yep, she confirmed. He even let me dictate his confession while he wrote it down. Honestly, we never did get along so well as when he was telling me how he knocked off all those ladies. It was flattering that he killed them for me. He wanted to get them out of the way so my duty to Mrs. Roosevelt would be over and I would be free to run off with him. Can you imagine that? The two of us on his tricycle? Ha! Did he say anything to you before he left? I asked, like where he was going? All he said was he'd tie me up while he got a 6-hour head start out of town, she said. That's about all. I don't think he got far because his tricycle is in front of your house. Oh, he didn't take the tricycle, she remembered and made a sad face because she knew what I was about to figure out. He escaped in my car? I yelped and stomped the ground, which sent a few more mice running. Yep, she confirmed. I figured you'd be upset about that. Aw, geez, well, now I really hope they catch him before he crashes it, I said. Me too, she agreed. But at the moment, this is the least of my worries. Now, help me stand. I've got to go upstairs and sit on the couch. Sitting in this chair has just about killed my rear end. I helped her up the stairs and got her onto the couch. Can I help you with anything? Can I call the police? First, I've got to call Mr. Green and apologize. He was right about the ladies being murdered, though he was wrong that it was me. But I was wrong about them dying of natural causes. So I guess my medical examiner days are over. After we set the record straight, we'll call the police and tell them to come get Mr. Spiz's confession. She pointed to the typewriter table where he had typed it and signed it. Can you believe that he did this? D-U-M-B. How stupid can you be? She asked, to no one in particular. I went over to the map and put a red pin in Mrs. Drugie's house, D21. I'm hungry, she said, and thirsty. I went into the kitchen and got her a glass of tap water. Don't eat anything from your house, I warned her. I'll go up and have Mom cook something for you. Okay, she replied. That would be nice. I suppose because I'm the last original Norvelter in town, I should celebrate. But I think I'll just lie down and take a nap. Don't you want to call Mr. Green and the police, I asked. We don't want Spiz to get away. Just let me have a tiny cat nap, she said. It won't matter how much head start Spiz has. He's too ugly not to be easily spotted. I plumped up the pillows, and once she was stretched out, I pulled her woolen afghan over her. One more thing, she asked with her eyes half closed, keeping in mind all those old ladies who have passed on. Today is the eve before we honor the first English child born in America, Virginia Dare, in 1587. Don't forget your history, she murmured. Life is a cycle. Exactly, I thought. Life is a cycle. And this is the history part I can add to the deer obituary. I bet Virginia Dare's parents even called her a little deer. I waited for a moment until she fell asleep before I leaned over and kissed her on the forehead. Isn't he sweet? Then I went outside and hopped on Mr. Spiz's tricycle and rode up to our house. It was a pretty good ride. I told Mom everything. She called the county police and quickly gathered up a basket of food for Miss Volker. Do you want me to come? I asked. I think it will be better if I handle this alone, she said. You've been a big help, but the police are just going to want to speak with adults. Besides, your dad is leaving tonight for Florida, and you might want to help him out. And you have a baseball game. I'm ungrounded, I asked. As long as you don't do something stupid again, she said. Reading all those books has made me a lot smarter, I replied. It's probably impossible for me to do something stupid again. Never say never, she advised me, then hurried off. I found Dad out by the J3 and told him everything. Figures it was Spiz, he said. I should have known that tricycle was a clue to just how demented he was. He took my car, I said angrily. Do you think we can fly around until we spot him? Oh, the cops will track him down. But here's our J3 plan, he said, changing the subject. I got a flight plan out of Norvelt tonight for Florida. But Mom has just allowed me to play baseball tonight, I cried out and nearly broke into tears. I'm finally free and I won't get my airplane ride? Don't start blubbering, he said. I've got it all figured out. You'll be playing in the outfield, right? Yep, I said. Usually center field because we don't have enough players to cover all the positions. Well, When you see me come out of the left field lights, run for the right field fence, he said and winked. What else, I asked. You'll figure it out, he replied, and snapped his fingers. You're a smart boy. Do you need me to help with anything? I asked. He looked over at the bomb shelter. Maybe you could start filling that in, he said and laughed. Really? Now? I asked. Not now, he said. You're free to go. I ran back to my room to finish my obituary with the Virginia Dare story. Then I ran down to Mr. Green's office. He was pecking away at a typewriter. Another dead old lady, he shouted when he saw me. Impossible. A deer this time, I said and passed him my written obituary. The hunters around here won't like it, he said after reading it, but I'm going to print it. Then I stuck out my hand. I won the bet, I said. Miss Volker didn't kill those ladies. He smiled, then opened the drawer where he kept the bet money. Here's your $4. I thought I had you when they arrested her, but then old Spiz turned out to be the killer. I'm writing up an article on it now. Sorry, kid, I have a deadline. That evening, I decided to ride Spiz's tricycle to the game. And when Bunny saw me ride up in my uniform and walk onto the field, she wanted to know everything about the murders. I'll give you all the details after the game, I said. It's full. I know everything. The who, the how, and the why. Everything, she asked. Remember how you told me about all the details on the dead Hell's Angel? I reminded her. Well, I'll tell you all the details about how all the old ladies died and how Spiz did it. And I bet it will make your nose bleed too. It's a deal, she said gleefully. Then she slapped me across the behind with her glove. Good to have you back on the field. Now let's play some ball. When the game began, I took the outfield. The sky was just growing dark, and I kept looking up into the air as if every batter was hitting me a fly ball. And then I heard the J3 to my left. I looked up, and he was coming in low. He didn't have a lot of room to land, and so he was feathering the engine to keep his speed down. I ran as fast as I could to the far fence. By then, a few people in the stands had seen him, and they began to point. And then I could hear their voices. And then I could only hear the engine of the J3 as Dad barely cleared the fence and set it down in right field. And then he rolled across center field, and by the time he reached left field, he turned the tail rudder, and the plane spun around. At that moment, I hopped off the fence and ran as fast as I could along the warning track until I was well past the propeller. Then I circled around to the passenger side. Dad leaned over and opened the door, and I hopped into the plane. Put your seatbelt on, he hollered over the engine noise, and then he hit the throttle, and the J3 hopped forward, and we went speeding across the green outfield grass. For a moment, I looked at the infield, and the entire team was just standing as still as painted plastic toys. And then I turned back to look out the windshield, just as Dad lifted the nose, and we left the ground and rose up over the fence and gained speed as we climbed into the air over Norvelt. Take a good look, Dad hollered around the sound of the prop. They should put a fence around this town. Like a museum, he suggested. Your mom is right. It is a piece of history. But like a lot of history, it won't last. I mean, it's not like Rome was saved or Athens. All that is left of them are some stone ruins. And in a few years, the wooden Norvelt houses will be hauled off and just the stone basements will be left and some tombstones. That'll be the end of it. Of course, there will be a historic plaque regarding what Norvelt used to be. But it's sad that it will be lost, I said. The whole idea behind why they built it will be gone. Things change. That's why they call it history, Dad said. But before this town is gone for good, let's give them one more thing to talk about. He pulled back on the stick, and when we banked to the left, I could see we were headed for the Viking Drive-In. Look in the back, Dad hollered above the noise of the engine and airflow. You'll find a milk crate full of balloons filled with red paint. I thought we were doing water balloons. Red should leave a little more history, he said. Water will evaporate. What's playing at the theater? I asked. Sink the Bismarck, he replied. Maybe we can help. In a minute, we were heading directly for the screen. Grab a balloon, Dad said. When I say bombs away, let it go. Because the sun had just gone down, the black and white preview for tonight's movie was still rolling. On the screen, the massive German World War II battleship was being launched. Then the picture changed to a worried British captain and a war room map of the Atlantic Ocean covered with little toy-sized ships. Is this okay to do? I asked Dad and held my balloon by the window. All is fair in love and war, he said. Bombs away. We both let the balloons drop, and Dad pulled back on the stick, and we climbed into the sky. Did we hit anything? I asked. You'll never know until you make a good second pass, he said, and laughed like a maniac. I gave him a balloon and got one for myself, and we turned and headed back toward the screen. Right away, I could see that both of us had scored direct hits. 2 red splotches had exploded against the black and white movie images, and the red paint ran like bloody tears down the face of the screen as torpedoes skimmed across the water toward the hull of the Bismarck. Just to let you kids know, I'm against this kind of action by this father. Graffiti kind of stuff against a movie theater screen or a drive-in screen. Once again, Dad went into a dive. Bombs away, he shouted. We let go, then quickly climbed up into the air again. There were 2 more balloons left. One more time, he said, and then we better get out of here before they call the Air Force on us. He steered the plane around, and I could see the red splotches on the screen. But this time, I also saw that all the cars had started up and their headlights were on and people were running out the pedestrian gate, and it was not funny. Cars were jamming up around the exit and their horns were blowing, and a few people were pointing up into the air at us, and I suddenly realized that I was doing it all over again. It was like I was shooting Dad's Japanese rifle at the screen, only then I had no idea how frightening it would be if I had actually shot someone or just scared someone. Now I knew exactly what I was doing. The reason you remind yourself of the stupid stuff you've done in the past is that so you don't do it again. That was what Miss Volker had been teaching us all these years. Dad, I said, let's leave. People are scared. We aren't hurting anything, he said. It's a joke. Maybe this joke isn't that funny, I said. Really, I want down. On the ball field, he asked. Sure, I said. I knew Bunny would think it was really funny, and I knew I would laugh about it with her. But it would be a false laugh because I'd probably get into trouble. And later when I got home, Mom would already know I had done something wrong. And I knew that being a jerk in the airplane and scaring people was really stupid. And being stupid at that moment would forever be a part of who I was. If Miss Volker was writing about it for her This Day in History column, it might read, on the morning of August 17, Jack Gantos was released from being grounded by his parents. But stay tuned, because on August 18, he might be grounded all over again, unless he remembers his history. The end. You made it, kids. So you can log into AR and take the book, or take the test. Here's some pictures. That's Jack when he was a kid. Kind of looks like Jonah, huh? Here's the family house in Norvelt. Well, that's Eleanor Roosevelt. There's a typical house in Norvelt. Do you know Eleanor Roosevelt, her maiden name was Roosevelt already? Let's see. There's his dad with his J3 airplane. All right. Dewberry Award-winning book. Anyway, obviously it's kind of a historical fiction book. Hope you enjoyed it, kids. Remember, we're going to do From Nowhere to Norvelt for our next read aloud. So that will start on Monday when we have class together. Yay. All right. Have a good night.